So thank you very much, Junyoung, for your insightful presentation. And our final presentation in this session is titled Vietnamese Buddhist Temple as a Religious Enclave in Korea, Belonging, Social Integration, and Complementary Protection to Institutional Coverage. I'll now be presenting this paper myself. So good afternoon once again. I'm Minju Kang from Korea University, and today I'll be presenting under the title Vietnamese Buddhist Temple as a Religious Enclave in Korea. So Vietnamese Temple, a Vietnamese Buddhist temple in Cheonan, South Korea, is far more than a site of worship. In Vietnam, the temples traditionally function as a cultural community centers, and Vietnamese Temple has come to play a similar role for Vietnamese migrants in Korea. So this raises a crucial questions. Under what conditions does such enclave become possible, and how does it reconfigure migrants' right to have rights? So the inquiry is grounded in the fieldwork at Vietnamese Temple, including the interviews with its abbot, Thich Tan, and participant observation. So Vietnamese Temple can be understood as a transnational religious space that took shape in response to institutional blind spots. So transnational religious placemaking refers to migrants creating physical or virtual places to forge a collective identity attached to both homeland and the host land. In other words, the religion enables migrants to sustain membership in multiple societies at once. The abbot of the Vietnamese Temple, Thich Tan, began his religious outreach in Korea in 2015, recognizing that the Vietnamese Buddhists in this country lacked both an organizational base for their religious activities and also broader community support. So together with other monks and other dedicated lay members, he established Vietnamese Temple in 2019, later contributing to founding of the sister temple in Yangsan, Haiwan Temple, and then currently in the process of founding another one in Gwangju, and its name will be Gatdong Temple. So beyond these physical temples, a network of Dao Chang Bienwo, which is local lay Buddhist associations, has also been formed nationwide, creating an organizational base for Vietnamese Buddhist migrants across Korea, even in the areas without a formal temple presence. So this expansion underscores how the temple's development is not isolated, but connects migrants across regions and back to Vietnam through religious and social ties. So indeed, migrants' religious placemaking is a transnational territorialization, linking the departure and destination societies, allowing the newcomers to maintain spiritual links with home while adapting to the host society. So Vietnamese Temple has emerged as what I call a form of parallel social infrastructure, which is an unofficial, community-driven support system that fills the blind spots left by Korea's migration governance. So why did this structure emerge? Korea's official multicultural policies and welfare programs, while expanding, have left institutional blind spots, especially for non-settled migrants who fall outside of the marriage or labor schemes. So Vietnamese Temple arose to fill these gaps. It complements but does not compete with the state system, standing alongside official programs to quietly catch those who slip through the cracks. So here I use the term parallel social infrastructure to capture the idea of Vietnamese Temple being a community-based safety net that provides complementary protection where the state's coverage is incomplete. So the temple's emergence was pretty inevitable given the structural limitations of Korea's migration governance. So it's a pragmatic response by the migrant community to ensure their own well-being and also their belonging. So Vietnamese Temple's roles can be analyzed on three interconnected levels. First, belonging, and second, social integration, and lastly, complementary protection to institutional coverage. So the first, the temple provides a very strong sense of belonging for Vietnamese immigrants within their community. On weekends, they flock to Vietnamese Temple to speak their language, eat familiar food, and on Vietnamese holidays, celebrate cultural or religious festivals, and simply to just feel at home. So visitors come seeking emotional comfort, information exchange, and social networks. So in short, a surrogate family and hometown in a foreign land. So this communal atmosphere helps alleviate the isolation and stress of the migrant life. So also notably, the space is very inclusive. Even Vietnamese Christians and non-Buddhist people attend the temple gatherings, joining the meals, and sometimes making the sign of the cross after the Buddhist prayers. So in this way, Vietnam Temple functions as a broad religious enclave of the Vietnamese in Korea, open to all who share a cultural background and thereby needing a diverse migrant population into a supportive community. And second, Vietnam Temple serves as a bridge for social integration, linking the Vietnamese enclave with the Korean society. While firmly rooted in Vietnamese culture, the temple functions as a critical intermediary that connects migrants with local institutions and communities, fostering mutual understanding and smoother integration. So this is achieved primarily through educational initiatives and practical support such as basic administrative guidance and inclusive community outreach that both invites Vietnamese and Korean participants. For example, its Multicultural Youth Center runs bilingual education programs, cultural workshops, and summer camps for the children of mixed Vietnamese and Korean families. So these programs help second generation of the youth maintain Vietnamese heritage while integrating into Korean society, aligning with the broader multicultural goals. So the youth from the center also participate in local cultural events and performances, showcasing Vietnamese culture to the broader public. So such initiatives create touch points of interaction between the Vietnamese community and Korean neighbors. More than just mere community activities, they can be seen as a process that reconstruct cultural and educational rights into lived and enforceable realities. In this way, access to language preservation, heritage education, and intercultural participation is secured at the community level beyond the scope of the state provision. So in effect, the temple complex operates as a boundary space, neither wholly within the migrant enclave nor the mainstream, but at the intersection. In this liminal position, Vietnam Temple mediates norms and expectations. It encourages migrants to adapt while also gently pushing the host society to accommodate cultural diversity. And this dual positioning aligns with the observation in diaspora studies that migrant religious spaces simultaneously serve as a cultural refuge and interaction portals. And third, and most critically, Vietnam Temple provides a complementary protection to institutional coverage. So this function addresses the institutional blind spots or safety net gaps that many migrants face in Korea. Over time, the temple has spawned two affiliated centers, Vietnam Welfare Center and Multicultural Youth Center. These were established because after arriving in Korea and engaging with the community, it became very clear that the problems arose on a daily basis within the Vietnamese migrant population, issues that extended far beyond the purely religious needs. So the Welfare Center primarily serves migrants, workers, and individuals in crisis. And it operates as a small-scale shelter. So at any given time, Vietnamese migrant workers who have lost their job and thus housing are provided the free lodging and meals. And the center also takes in Vietnamese international students who experience unexpected pregnancies with no support. Also migrants suffering from depression or mental health struggles, and Vietnamese married migrant women fleeing domestic conflicts. So these compassion-driven services reflect how Vietnam Temple functions as a de facto welfare provider. The temple community mobilizes donations and volunteer labor to assist those whom official channels underserve. In doing so, it embodies Buddhist compassion practices applied to social care, thereby translating the spiritual values into concrete welfare. Importantly, this community-based welfare provision through an informal network does not seek to replace the state's role, but to complement it. So in practice, Vietnam Temple guarantees a minimum level of security and dignity for migrants, even when formal rights or services are lacking. So central to Vietnam Temple's role as a community hub is the collective leadership of its monastic community. So together, they serve as a traditional spiritual leaders with a modern outreach approach and also as the institutional architects within this transnational network. In many ways, the monks collectively embody the temple's dual identity. On one hand, they are devout Buddhist practitioners, rigorously adhering to traditional religious practices and moral discipline. However, on the other, they are effectively community organizers, being the focal points or the senior migrant figures who act as informal counselors for Vietnamese Buddhist migrants. So this dual role or layered identity enables them to navigate between the spiritual and temporal realms. So while the monks maintain a personal commitment to traditional Buddhist practice in their own monastic lives, they adopt a contemporary and informal methods when engaging with the Vietnamese migrant community. Outreach often takes place not only in the temple hall, but in everyday spaces, like tending the temple's vegetable garden alongside lay members, and joining Vietnamese community sports events, or conversing with migrants during festivals. Through these activities, they offer guidance, listen to concerns, and build trust. So for them, holding firmly to tradition in personal practice while embracing modern approaches in community engagement allows the temple to remain both authentic and responsive to the realities of the migrant life in Korea. So this adaptability keeps the temple very relevant and also very accessible. And as the institutional architects, the abbot and other monks have been the driving force behind the new initiatives. They have collectively built a parallel institutional ecosystem, and a crucial factor enabling this success is its insider-led structure. The monk and other core organizers are Vietnamese nationals who share the lived experiences of the migrants they serve, giving them intimate and nuanced knowledge of challenges. So this insider perspective fosters trust and openness in counseling and support, while allowing the precise identification of the needs. So by strategically tailoring the programs to the community's demographic realities, including age, gender, or socioeconomic background, they have mobilized collective buy-in and volunteerism in the absence of formal state backing. Yet the structural constraints weigh heavily on the monks themselves. As foreign nationals in Korea, visa precarity is a constant challenge. They remain on religious worker visas that must be renewed every 2 years, preventing the long-term insecurity. Despite living in Korea for over a decade and spearheading an essential community institution, they cannot obtain permanent residency or citizenship under current rules. So this limits their ability to make long-range plans and leaves the temple very vulnerable to any change in their legal status. So their situation exemplifies how migrant community leaders, even when deeply embedded in local society, often operate in a gray zone of legality and recognition. So while Vietnam Temple has steadily developed a resilient and community-driven network itself, it faces a significant structural limitations that highlight the uneasy fit of such religious enclaves within existing systems. One major issue is the legal and bureaucratic barriers, so the temple's religious status has disqualified it from certain public funding or support programs that explicitly exclude faith-based. Another limitation is funding. The temple's welfare work depends on small donations and occasional gifts, making programs like the shelter or education and other camps vulnerable and difficult to sustain. So human resources are also very limited. Perhaps the most fundamental structural challenge is the issue of recognition, both social and political. Migrant religious enclaves exist somewhat outside the purview of the mainstream institutions. So while they provide vital services, they are not formally integrated into nationwide welfare system. So this means their contributions can be overlooked, and they receive little governmental support or acknowledgement. In Korea, the multicultural policy has primarily focusing on assimilating migrants into Korean life, but a migrant-run Buddhist temple offering shelter and counseling does not neatly fit into these frameworks. In some cases, there may be even skepticism or concern from the local society, fearing that enclaves incur self-segregation. So in summary, Vietnam Temple thrives on a community resilience and compassion, but its very existence also exposes the constraints faced by the migrant-driven initiatives under a state that has yet to fully embrace them. So Vietnam Temple is not an isolated phenomenon. But instead, it is a part of a broader pattern of migrant religious enclaves in South Korea that are increasingly significant in the landscape of social welfare and integration. So common to these examples is an ethos of compassion-centered practice. So compassion becomes a driving logic for volunteerism and resource sharing, and in doing so, these enclaves produce what can be called community-based welfare. So this bottom-up welfare often has a personal and empathetic quality that formal institutions often struggle to replicate. So in Korea's increasingly multicultural society, such enclaves are in fact pioneering models of grassroots multiculturalism, where migrants themselves build inclusive micro-societies that cater to diverse needs and invite participation from others. The compassion practices at the heart of these enclaves often succeed in reaching people who might never approach a government office for help. So thus, migrant religious enclaves have become critical in producing social protection and belonging beyond the state's direct reach. So in this context, this informal welfare systems operates as a mechanism for realizing the rights that members are entitled to enjoy regardless of their legal status. Essentially, these faith-based and community-embedded mutual aid networks function as infrastructures of everyday rights, where the reproduction of rights take place through the lived practices. So in reframing the case of Vietnam Temple, we move from describing a set of community functions to recognizing the political significance of this migrant-created space. So Vietnam Temple is, in a sense, a rights-producing space operating within the state. So by this, we mean that the temple enables migrants to exercise and claim rights in a practice, even when they lack full rights as legal residents or citizens. The Hannah Arendt's famous notion of the right to have rights, which means the right to belong to a community where one's rights are recognized, finds a concrete expression here. Vietnamese migrants, many of whom have insecure legal status, find in Vietnam Temple a community that acknowledges their dignity and entitlements as human beings. Through the temple, they attain what might be called the social right of membership, the right to be cared for, to be heard, and to participate in communal life. And notably, the temple shifts migrants from being passive beneficiaries of rights to active co-creators of rights. For example, when migrants volunteer at the welfare center or organize a cultural event, they are collaboratively shaping the norms and provisions of their community, effectively deciding what support or recognition they ought to have. In doing so, they are asserting a form of political agency. Thus, Vietnam Temple transforms migrants from right recipients into right co-producers, turning the compassionate acts into a reconfiguration of the very basis of rights. So here, the monks' collective efforts are illustrative. Their charitable work goes beyond the ad hoc aid, functioning as a practice that redefines the foundations of rights for their community. By providing shelter or education where the state does not, they affirm that migrants deserve those rights and actively make them the reality on the ground. This is a quiet but profound form of politics. It creates a parallel channel of rights realization that runs alongside the official citizenship-based channel. And of course, this raises very complex implications. On one hand, spaces like Vietnam Temple can be seen as empowering. They carve out the autonomy for migrant communities and force the broader society to reckon with pluralistic forms of belonging. And they demonstrate that migrants need not be mere subjects of the state policies, but can be agents who crack open the state's exclusive structure of the rights provision, expanding the realm of who gets to have rights and through what means. On the other hand, the very need for a parallel infrastructure points to the limitation of the current system. Is it just or sustainable to leave the essential welfare to the charity of the religious communities? The temple's experience shows both the potential and precarity of such arrangements. For the migrants involved, Vietnam Temple has been a steady source of support, helping to make their lives more stable and connected. It stands as a politically charged space, one where the boundary between the citizen and the non-citizen is blurred by the acts of mutual aid, and where a vision of inclusive belonging is enacted daily in the shadow of the state. So in conclusion, Vietnam Temple illustrates how a transnational religious enclave can emerge as an indispensable parallel social infrastructure in a new diaspora. It thrives by addressing institutional omissions through culturally resonant, compassion-driven practices. In doing so, it not only aids Vietnamese migrants in here and now, but also subtly reconfigures the politics of belonging and rights in South Korea's multicultural landscape. So this case urges us to recognize migrant enclaves as vital stakeholders, as spaces of innovation and social support, and as communities that are actively negotiating the terms of inclusion from below. So Minju Temple's story is ultimately about migrants claiming their right to have rights by building it themselves, gradually through each temple service and every act of compassion. So I hope this case invites us to think more broadly about the role of migrant communities in creating inclusive societies, and I'll be very happy to hear your thoughts and questions. Thank you.